Fortunately, I decided we will only have 3 slides, after which we'll jump into more of the demo. I really don't like to have too many slides. So what will we see today? We'll see a demo using one of the sample apps, which will involve configuring ConfigMaps for Kubernetes. And it's okay if you don't get it right now, or if you've never played with Kubernetes and this seems foreign to you. I'm going to try to explain what this is in a bit. It will also look at services in Kubernetes and how do you use kubedns or core DNS to look up services in Kubernetes. We will talk a little bit and I'll show you what the readiness probes is for BWC in Kubernetes. I'll show you the monitoring of BWC applications. How do we bind applications to the BWC mon containers? And lastly, we'll look at OpenTracing using Jaeger and how do we do that in a Kubernetes environment. I think most of the demos that we have done till date have been Dockerized and not really using a PaaS platform. So this is something new for the team as well. So concepts for today, and this is a very, very, very high level introduction to these concepts. I don't expect everyone to have a background of Kubernetes. So quickly, what's a Kubernetes cluster? It's a collection of nodes where we can run containers in the simplest form. Minikube is a program which will create a VM, which will allow us to run our Kubernetes cluster. Pods are something that hold containers. It can have one or more containers, and we'll figure out how that helps. Services is an endpoint or an address or a DNS entry, which is basically an abstract component in front of the pod, like a load balancer per se, and allows you to have addresses which stay agnostic to pods. ConfigMaps is basically, in the easiest term, a configuration map. It's a key value pair in Kubernetes. And deployments is basically a group of pods and the configuration and how do we want to deploy them. Three tools that we use today is Business Studio for CE, VS Code, because I like to write my YAML in VS Code, and ZSH terminal separately outside VS Code because I want to show everyone how cool my terminal is. Okay, so with that, the last slide is a thank you slide. We'll come back to that later. Let's move on to Studio. So I'm going to import the bookstore app. I am using a BWC 244. I am just going to go ahead and import the bookstore app. For those of you who've never tried the bookstore app, it's basically a REST service. And that REST service calls database to get a list of books. It allows you to add a bunch of books. This is one of the first apps we built as a REST demo for BW6, BWC. And if those of you remember, there's an old product called Express as well. This has been converted to a BWCE, so you can see that it's the container label here. It's not really tied down to one or the other. With One Studio, if you've never seen this, quick recap, you can actually go here and choose configure and say change the deployment target, and you can change the deployment target to an app space, TIBCO cloud, and it will do a bunch of magic for you. Another cool feature that we have seen is what we call the Dependency Viewer. So let's take a quick look at how that works. You can click on any of the artifacts and basically say, you can explore dependencies or you can explore references. So if I look at explore dependencies, it gives me a whole bunch of dependencies for this particular process. I can have a look at this in tree view, which makes it a little more readable to me. And it gives me an entire hierarchy of whatever this particular process depends on. I can filter this out, or I can limit the depth by just clicking here and say, okay, I don't want to see wishdils. I only want to see shared resources and other processes. And if there's no direct XSD dependency, it doesn't show that as well. Or I can say, okay, I want to see everything. I can actually click on this and maximize this a little bit more. So you can see the entries right here. You can even actually double click on any of these resources to take you to the resource. So this is one of the new things that we added late last year, and I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to look at it. You can also look at it another way around. You can click on a particular schema and say, hey, who is referring to this schema? So I can look at this books.xhd and say explore references, and it tells me exactly who's referring to this particular schema. So that's a bi-directional thing that we have introduced. But I'm not going to spend too much time in design time today. All I'm going to do in this particular project is create a new profile, and I'll tell you why later. But I'm going to create a new profile for this application. Call it K8 because I want to externalize all my configuration. And you can see that it copies over everything from my default profile into my new profile. Now, one of the new features that we have added in BWC 244 is the ability to export profiles as properties files and directly as software files, as well as directly export to console. So I don't have console running in my environment today, and that's why we'll be using ConfigMaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and select this and add this as a bookstore service. Uh, let's say we want properties, right? And I'm going to store it. Okay, this was the old folder. Let's do like, right? And what this will do is it will, if you see this particular checkbox here, it will tokenize those properties for you. And when you decide to use this particular profile with the application, you can then inject values later when the application is starting up. Okay, so that was creating the properties file. Let's create the year file for deployment. Choose my live demo directory. I'm going to try to do everything live, and I'm going to hope that everything works as well, because my net has been acting up. Okay, so I'm in the folder where we created this. So I have my live demo folder here. Let me just copy the Docker file. So right, and simply to look at the Docker file, you can just, it's nothing, it's just adding this particular year file and it's exposing port 8080. I do want to expose port 1890 as well because I intend to use admin with it. So here I go off to VS Code and open up and say expose 8090. Got it. Let's create the Docker image. So Docker build T, let's call it, before that, right? So I'm using Minikube as I said earlier, and the version of Minikube I think is 1.12 and Kubernetes is 1.15. kubectl is pointing to Minikube, so if I do kubectl get pods, I just have admin running, I have a Postgres database running, and simplest is the Jaeger service that I've named. I also have a bunch of other things running which we'll not be covering today, like Linkerd and possibly later on as Istio as well, but we won't cover those today. So the next thing I'm going to do is create the Docker image. So I'm going to say Docker build T. Let's call it bookstore demo 2. That creates the Docker image. If I say Docker images, it will show me that the latest image created is v2. 4 seconds ago, I was trying this out some time back, so you'll see multiple images, but don't worry about that. Now, next step to deploying this in Kubernetes is, as we said, we need to create a manifest file. So I'm just going to go ahead and say new, and let's call it bookstore demo.yaml. Now I'm using a plugin called Cloud Code, which is very cool if you're new to Kubernetes and hate typing. All I need to do is do a control space here in an empty file and say create a new Kubernetes deployment. And I can name it to say bookstore deployment, and all I need to do now is point to the right image, and if I remember the image name, it was bookstore demo v2. So all I say is bookstore demo v2, and we should be good to go. I'm going to take away the resources because I don't want to tweak them at this point. It also puts the right port number for us, so everything looks good. The only thing with Minikube is that if you don't put this next thing called image pull policy, it will try to pull this image from Docker Hub, which we don't want because we have built it locally. So I'm going to just say image pull policy is, again, I don't remember the options. I can say never or it's not present, and it should work. And the next thing we do is we now push these apps to Kubernetes. So the way we push it is we say kubectl apply, and we apply the YAML configuration, which will create the deployment, which in turn will create a bunch of other Kubernetes artifacts. So kubectl apply -f, and if I hit tab, that should do it. So it creates the deployment. Now I can say get pods, which runs my container, and you can see, well, it's my container is already running. So I can actually try to look at the logs now. And as you can see that it's not really running yet. It's just that since we haven't provided an idea to the Kubernetes cluster and the APIs, when we are really ready, it's always going to think that as soon as the container is started, it's running. But as you can see that the app node framework is not started yet. So now it started well, fine, and here's the part for those of you who want to see what's really going to happen later is there is an exception in creating the books table, and we'll figure out how to deal with that. So the BW application is started. What do we do next, right? We want to access the Swagger UI. You could use port forwarding, but I don't really like to use port forwarding, so I'm going to go ahead and and now create the abstract part to access this pod. And I'm going to again call this store service. The type I'm going to change to something called as node port because I'm using Minikube and I don't want to use something else. This will open up a port on the node for me. And I'm going to take the port as 80 and forward it to the target port of 8080, which is the container port here. Next thing I do is I apply the configuration again. You'll see now that the service has been created, but the deployment was unchanged. So this is how you can encapsulate your pods by services. And then Kubernetes takes care of redirecting traffic from the services to the pods. And for those of you who know this is probably a repeat lecture, but this will allow you to scale those pods to multiple numbers. So you could have 5 of these bookstore apps running and a single address to actually reach them. So how do we find that address in the Minikube? You say Minikube service list, and it will list all the services that are available which have ports taken. And as you can see, there is a Mon service, there is a bookstore service that we just created. So I'm going to take this host and port. Oops. Take the host and port, go back to my browser, say /Swagger because that's where Swagger is generally shown. And I see Swagger. Now, for those of you who remember the exception, there's something wrong here, but I still see the Swagger part. I'm going to say try it out, and at some point it will try to reach the database and it will fail. And we can go and have a look at the logs again. But basically what is happening is, if you look at the logs here, it says BW profile is set to local.subsquare, which means it's using the local profile and not the one from Kubernetes. The KH profile that we created, but we haven't instructed it to use it either. So let's try to do that now. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete my created artifacts, and all I need to do is just point to the bookstore YAML file and everything gets deleted. Back at square one. Now, I want to, before I change the config map, I want you to understand what the readiness probe is. Right? We saw that the container was started and Kubernetes termed it as running right away. That's because Kubernetes thinks that as soon as the container is started, it's ready to receive requests, which is not true for BWC containers. So what are we going to do is we are going to go ahead and introduce a readiness probe. And if you actually go to the spec, you will see a bunch of different options that are available. But what we will do is I'm going to come down to this thing here and again do readiness and with prompts, and then I'm going to control space again, and I say, hey, I want to do an HTTP GET on port 7777, and I want the path to be /_p. So what this will do is this will try to hit, the Kubernetes API will try to hit this particular path to figure out when the container is ready, and BWC will only return a 200 OK when the application is really started. So now if I go ahead and push this again and try to do get pods, you'll see that 0 of 1 is running, which means it's now understanding that the application is not yet started. And you can keep looking at it and at some point it will start. Now, those of you who don't like the CLI, we have you covered. You have something called as the Kubernetes Dashboard. Only if Zoom allows me to go back there. Yeah, so all you do is you hit Minikube Dashboard and it will open up this nice little dashboard, which I have here. Oh, I don't have it, so I can just control to this one. Right, and it shows me that, okay, so the readiness probe failed, it's going to restart a bunch of times and it will go ahead. If you guys hear the buzzing noise, that's my laptop fan spinning. If it gets too bad around, please let me know. I'll switch to a different microphone. Okay, so you can see everything that we did here. You can see a deployment, you can see the pods, you can see that the logs right here. So you can now see that the application was started, but yes, we didn't really fix this, did we? So let's go back and try to fix this. So the way I'm going to fix this is by injecting a config map. And that's essentially, if you look at this here, it's a bunch of key value pairs. So this is another config map, which basically has, this is the key, this is the strategy. This has the value, right? So let's create our first config map here. And it looks like my terminal is going up. No, it's not. Which one was it? Not this one. Okay. So let's create a new config map. So it's create config map. And if you remember, there was this nice little properties file that we had created, right? You can go ahead and now put in the actual values that you want to use. So I'm going to change this to the user, and I'm not covering secrets today, but ideally a password will be a secret, not just a plain string value. But what I will show you now here is how to access the Postgres database that we have directly as a Kubernetes service. So let's go back to terminal, or you can go back to the UI. and let's say get services, right? And as you can see, there is a Postgres service, right? And you can find out what the IP is, and you can try to change that to the cluster IP there. But there is an easier way to do this. Is all you do is you say service name dot namespace. So we're using the default namespace because we haven't added a service namespace there. Dot I think it is SVC, which means it's a service. Dot cluster. Dot local IP. I think I missed something here. Give me a second. So local cluster dot local, not local IP. That's why I have this handy. Yeah, and what that will do is it will automatically map this host name to wherever the service is running. So let's save this. The only other change that I need to do is I want to add this particular environment variable called BW profile K8 to instruct the BWCE engine to use the K8 profile, which was tokenized, so that these values are populated inside the profile. So now that I've done this, I'm going to push it to a config map. And the easiest way to do a config map is kubectl create config map and use this option to say from env file bookstore service. I think it's called -1. Yeah. And it's created a config map. We can go back to the UI because the UI shows this better. And if I click on the bookstore service config map, I can see that my properties are now in the Kubernetes ConfigMap service. I am now going to try to map this particular config map back to my deployment that I've created. So the way I do that is I can go to my bookstore v2 demo YAML. Yeah, this one here. And let's go ahead and now say that the environment for this particular container comes from space, reference, name. And here's the beauty, because I'm using cloud code, I can just do a command space and it shows me all the config maps that are available in Minikube. So no typing. And it tells me when it was created as well. So really cool tooling from VS Code there. Now, if you don't like using the CLI or if you don't like using the dashboard, there is something here as well, which will allow you to browse your Minikube cluster right from VS Code and find out your service names, find out the configuration. And not just that, you can actually open their YAML files from here and see what's actually running inside. So that's just a little insight information if you want to use cloud code. Now, now that we've done this, I'm going to apply this configuration again. So kubectl apply. And now you can see I didn't change anything in the service, so the service is unchanged, but the deployment is reconfigured. Let's look at the pods now. And now you see Kubernetes at work, and that's why we use Kubernetes. Is there is a new pod being created, but the old pod still lives on till the new pod actually scales up to one. This helps users to at least have one running service, and I can define multiple of them. So actually I could go back to my deployment and say replicas equal to 2, and it will keep 2 pods running at all times, right? So I'm just going to wait, and now you see that this pod is running, that pod has gone away, right? And let's go back to our Swagger and try out our service. Oops. Refresh this. Might be here. Port number is changed. Okay, there we go. And let's hit right out now. And now I see the information from the database right here. So what we saw basically here is that using externalized configuration with no changes to my application, I could easily direct it to use different environments, different databases, different usernames, passwords, and not touch a single pod. The way Kubernetes handles pods, you can also be sure that while your new configuration is being applied, the older configuration stays on to service older requests. So having seen this, I think the next step I'd like to show you is how do you add this to BWC mod, right? One of the things that you could do is go ahead and create the whole config map again, uh, right? Go back here, add those properties here, like I had done for my earlier one, but I'm going to try a different approach here. So I'm going to take these two properties and apply them directly in my config map. So I'm going to go back to the UI and go to my config map here, and I'm going to edit this one. So I'm going to go ahead and say edit, and that's the data here. So I'm going to go ahead and say comma, oops, what's the key? Colon, and as you can see here, I'm using the BWC mon service rather than the actual pod IP of the mon. That should be okay. So let's update that, and you can see that the URL has come up, right? Let's go ahead and also enable OpenTracing so that we can see that in action. So go ahead and say comma. And by the way, you could have done both at the same time. It's just that I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a typo. And that's that. Right. So update now. BWC doesn't do hot updates at this point. So even though the config map has changed, we haven't instructed the engine to restart. So I'm going to use the scale command to basically kill the old pod and start a new pod. So I'm going to say get scale deployment bookstore replica 0, which will basically scale it down to 0 pods, and then I'm going to scale it back up to 1. And now that it comes back up to 1, we can go back to our logs to see that the new pod is starting up. And once a new pod starts up, it should automatically show up in my BWC mon as well. And we can check if that shows up. Let's refresh. Yeah, readiness fails because my timeout is 30 seconds, but it will come back up. Yeah, started BW application. Go back to monitoring, refresh, and I can see my app automatically registered here in BWC mod, right? And for those of you who've tried it out or have tried out BW6, this is very similar. You see app instances, you can turn on instance-based stats collection, you can see all the endpoints that are there from that particular uh, service, you can see process diagrams, you can actually turn on things like instrumentation and say monitoring as well. Let's try to hit a few jobs just to make sure Minikube has not changed my IP again. We're going to try that out again. And no, it hasn't. So I could go back to Swagger and keep a couple of jobs and go back to my process monitoring, and now I can actually see things like process data. So you can see that some process data is created here, and if I actually open this up, it will also show me which operation was it, and green icon here that it was the get books. This is for the DB. I can actually click here and see the parent process now, and click on one of these, and it will say, hey, I hit the get book. So this nice little green, I don't think it's very visible, but when you try it out yourself, you'll see that it hit the get, and I can double click on the get, and it will take me to the get books. I click too far, too slow. And I can see that the get books was executed, here was the configuration, the query, and that's the output data that came out and went back. How about tracing, right? I did enable open tracing, but I won't find a trace here because I forgot to add the magic annotation. So all you need to do after enabling open tracing, and in 245 is actually very easy. You just have a switch on the UI right here. I couldn't get the 245 UI today, but you have a switch on the UI to just enable open tracing, so you need lesser properties. But what we basically need to do now is just add this annotation to my bookstore YAML file. So that goes here. I save it and apply it again. Or I could scale it down to 0 and then scale it back up. Well, actually, no, I will still have to apply it. Bookstore demo flat, right? And now I still have to scale it to 1. And we should now see something very interesting happening. So if I do kubectl get now, here you can see that actually 2 containers being started up instead of 1. Let's have a look at what these are. Right? So if I go back to my dashboard here and I go back to my pods while it's waiting for my container to start, I can now see some new variables here. Right? So your Jaeger service name, Jaeger propagation, a bunch of these URLs are automatically added. And if I look at the logs, there's not just a bookstore container, but there is a Jaeger agent which gets automatically injected. So a second container is now injected directly into your pod, and BWC talks to this local agent, and the local agent knows how to talk to the collector. So if I go back now to my Swagger and hit a few requests, hopefully it started by now. Yeah. So now if I try hitting a couple of requests here, right, and now let's get back to Jaeger and say find traces, and that's the trace that we just tried, right? So, and obviously if we have 2 apps, we will see a link of 2 traces, and we can go deeper. But even with this, you can get a lot of information like you see the job ID, you see the activity name, you see the process name. So this particular process started with books, then went into books DB at this point where it's a new span here. So it's a new subspan. And if you look at books DB, there is JDBC activity, which is talking to this particular shared resource, right? And it also tells you the job ID for the activity as well, right? So quite a lot of information can be found using tracing alone. Obviously, you know how much time it took, right? So you can find out that the DB activity took the most time here compared to the rest of the stuff. And if you have multiple applications talking to each other, you see this whole trace gets a little complicated as well, but it tells you a lot of the whole thing that's happening in the entire system. So with that, I'm going to stop and start taking questions because we roughly have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. Guys, are you still on?
Yeah.
Hey, yes. And by the way, Aditya, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful. And obviously, glad that we recorded it. I'm pretty sure it's going to be useful for, lots of folks even afterwards. But yeah, I think as Aditya mentioned, it's probably a good opportunity to open up a little bit. If you have, questions, if somebody wants to step in, do share your feedback, chat or if you want to just unmute yourself and even talk about that. But, whatever works. And the other opportunity, of course, is to put it on Slack. Alex, I see you've raised your hand. Aditya, maybe if you want to unmute him or something, if he has a question or a comment.
Sure, I'll try to unmute Alex. I mean, everyone can unmute themselves for sure. There's no host change here, but let me unmute Alex.
By the way, my bad. I think it's a clap sign, not a raise hand sign. So I think.
Yeah. It was a clap sign. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so
hey, Alex, I thought sorry, go ahead. I was saying Alex probably started doing the Minikube demos already, which is why he's silent.
Okay, so quick. I think Alex did it last week when I published it. So quick question from, I think, Kulbhushan. If you have Jaeger, do you need BWC Mon? Which one is more performant? Good question. If you have Jaeger, you will probably need BWC Mon if you want to see input-output data. However, we have introduced something called as custom tags in OpenTracing. So you could map certain input-output data as custom tags to show up in OpenTracing. OpenTracing is definitely more performant because it has something called as sampling strategies. So you could have different sampling strategies set up to say, do you want OpenTracing to be always on? Do you want it to be weighted to say once every 10 jobs? Or do you want it to be probabilistic and have a factor there? So performance-wise, yes, what we say is keep OpenTracing on all the time. It doesn't hurt. And then when you start seeing issues, maybe you can turn on BWC on and take it from there.
Hi, I have a question regarding. Did you try to set the Jaeger through the daemon set, not through the annotation? And did you compare maybe the additional overload that is set?
So not for this demo, but yes, you're right, Lucas. You could set up Jaeger as a daemon set so that it doesn't go into everything, every pod as a sidecar container. That will definitely work. I just took the easy way out. But for sure, you might want to use daemon sets instead of sidecars. And Jaeger has documented that. So before I forget, a couple of good links that everyone should probably see. Let's see. So official Jaeger documentation. So as Lucas was pointing out, you could also install the agent as daemon set here. You will basically need to look at the Kubernetes deployment. So you don't need to understand operators, run these bunch of commands. As long as you're in Minikube, you should be fine. Do not try it on somebody else's cluster. It might mess up, hopefully not, but I can't be sure. And more importantly, if you want to try the demo, it is on TIBCO software, BW samples under BWC Minikube. The apps used are different, but you could easily use the bookstore app and try out the new tooling that I'd shown. But it tells you everything from installing Minikube. This one uses Consul, but you could obviously now use ConfigMaps. And it has pointers to how to install Jaeger and a bunch of other things that I found out while I was creating the demo. And again, you don't need to be a Kubernetes expert to try this out because I was not. I was learning Kubernetes myself, and instead of using Java or something else, I said, okay, let's use BWC and see how well it fits. Any more questions? Okay. No, so Hitesh just had a additional thing. Feel free to ask questions.
No.
Yeah.
I was just adding to what Kul's question was. So, yeah.
And again, if you like Lightstep, you want to try Lightstep, or if you want to try what's the Twitter one, Zipkin, you can try Zipkin as well. We support a bunch of these out of the box. You can actually write your tracing implementation. It's all, again, on GitHub. There's a whole API of what you need to do, but you can try whatever you need to do. Does the OpenTracing with JMS receive message work? Yes. So we support OpenTracing with HTTP and JMS protocols. So for HTTP, it works with SOAP, HTTP, REST, and any out-of-the-box activities which basically use either an HTTP connector or an HTTP client. And for JMS, it does work with the JMS palette for sure. And we also transition the state. So if you have a send JMS message going out to a receive JMS message on the other end, you'll see the traces are linked. That's a good question, Mark.
I have a good question regarding the ConfigMaps. Do we have any best practices, and is it better to set the one config map for one application, or many, or store the environments in one config map for many applications, or one config for each? You know what I mean? Like,
yes, so I would say probably one config map for every application would be a better option, just so that you can change it per app rather than affecting each one. At some point, we will start supporting hot updates. I know I'm being recorded, but no pressure. So I would prefer that, you know, having config maps one per application should be fine. And when I say one per application, it's one per deployment. So you might still have multiple pods in your deployment. And you might say, okay, all these 3 or 4 applications might want the same map, just because they're running together, they depend on each other. And if one is recycled, then everything else needs to be recycled. Okay, more questions? Okay, hold on.
Yeah, maybe I'll moderate and pick some from the chat. I don't know if you answered Mark Bloomfield's question. Will OpenTracing work with JMS receive messages?
Yes, so that one's done. What is the Visual Code plugin? Yes, so the Visual Studio Code plugin was Code Cloud or Cloud Code, one of the two, but it's fairly new. Yeah, so I just for everyone to know, I downloaded it today. I heard about it last week, but I just tried it out today. It's really a time saver to what I was using earlier. I don't like to type, as you saw. Next question, is your K8s running on the cloud? No, mine is not. I am running on Minikube, although we have a cluster where I could have actually done it. I just didn't want the net to behave weirdly. Any chance to see it in future on Azure or AWS? I'll leave that up to PMs to decide if we want to put up. Okay, I think Rahul has already answered that. Most customers are in production, are running it on AWS and K8s. Okay. Newbie question, normally with BWC customer, do we use Minikube, or how much would this change in the real scenario? So actually Minikube is what folks recommend if you don't have a cluster. If you have a cluster and you are the master and you want to try it out, feel free. I was going to try to do that, but unfortunately my cluster is shared with half my team, and they would kill me if I made a mess of it. So I use Minikube. But if you're a newbie, I would definitely recommend Minikube to play it safe. And in theory, anything that can work on Minikube will work in GCP, or will work in Kubernetes in production. An alternative to Minikube is also the Docker desktop app, or the Docker for desktop For Windows and Mac, it has Kubernetes inbuilt, so you don't need Minikube. All you need to do is click a checkbox and it works. But I use Minikube just in case folks don't have that or coming from different platforms and find errors. The Minikube is just a universal thing. Any recommendations for automating the process you showed during the demo? Absolutely. You could use CI/CD tools like Jenkins. You could use the Maven plugin for Kubernetes. The only reason I didn't add all of that today is I didn't want to overwhelm people who are looking at BWC or Kubernetes for the first time. But you could easily not do anything but just right-click, generate form, point to your Kubernetes environment, and just leave it there, and the Jenkins will take care of the rest. By the way, I hate setting that up every time. So luckily we have a document now. So Hitesh, I think, has shared how you can do that on the BusinessWorks channel. So you can find that out, and you can follow that document to set up the CI/CD pipeline and just use the same CI/CD pipeline for this demo.